Deep within the heart of the night, a convicted murderer named Marshall found himself in a prison transport vehicle, en route to his final destination, a desolate prison where he would await his impending execution. The cold steel bars and the heavy shackles around his wrists reminded him of the gravity of his crimes. The darkness outside was interrupted only by the faint glow of the vehicle's headlights as it sped along a desolate road. Suddenly, a massive moose bolted out from the dense forest, causing the driver to lose control. The transport vehicle veered off the road and crashed, leaving Marshall dazed and disoriented. As Marshall regained consciousness, he found himself in an unnatural realm. The woods surrounding him were engulfed in an eerie fog, where the air hung heavy with foreboding. The trees, their branches extending like twisted arms, seemed to reach out hungrily, eager to ensnare him. The vegetation was a sickly shade of dark green, almost black, tainted by a malevolent mildew. A grotesque roar pierced the silence, causing a flock of birds to scatter into the air, their wings beating in panic. An albino Portuguese sheepdog suddenly appeared, barking frantically, as if attempting to guide Marshall through the darkness. He heard a slight ringing sound, reminiscent of a concussion, resonating in his ears, though no visible injuries adorned his body. Driven by desperation, Marshall followed the dog, hoping it would lead him to safety. Eventually, they arrived at a dilapidated two-story house, its peeling paint and broken windows echoing the decrepit state of its existence. The wraparound porch sagged under its own weight, and broken statues littered the overgrown yard. The roof caved in, revealing a harrowing interior. However, it was in the backyard where true horror lay. A cemetery of immense proportions stood before Marshall, its eerie atmosphere permeating the air. There was something undeniably unnatural about it. In its heart stood a massive willow tree, its weeping branches casting elongated shadows that danced upon the tombstones. Before stepping into the cemetery, Marshall searched desperately for the loyal dog that had guided him thus far, but it had vanished without a trace. Filled with trepidation, he ventured through the rusted iron gate, determined to find any clues to his whereabouts. As he explored the graveyard, leaves rustled ominously behind him. His heart pounding, he darted around a mausoleum, thinking it might be the police pursuing him. Hiding behind a tombstone, he strained to listen, his breath catching in his throat. The convict's eyes scanned the darkness, and he began his cautious journey toward the house, maneuvering between crumbling tombstones and open graves. Suddenly, a raspy, low growling reached his ears, accompanied by chilling breaths that seemed to scrape against the air. Marshall turned, his eyes widening in horror as he beheld a creature of nightmarish proportions. It stood before him, naked and hairless, its gender indistinguishable. Its pale, sickly skin glistened as if covered in a slimy residue. Jet black eyes pierced his soul, while pointed ears twitched with malevolence. Its elongated mouth stretched unnaturally wide, unleashing a hideous roar that echoed through the cemetery. Frozen with terror, Marshall let out a scream, stumbling backward into an open grave. He fell, landing with a bone-jarring thud inside a coffin, which promptly slammed shut above him. Through his screams, he could hear the creature scratching and gargling on the outside of the coffin, as if taunting him with its presence. Fear consumed him, his breaths growing shallow as panic threatened to suffocate him. The raspy breathing and scratching persisted, tormenting Marshall from the other side of the coffin lid. Paralyzed by his terror, he listened helplessly, unable to escape the confines of his grave. As the minutes turned into an eternity, his panicked hyperventilation eventually caused him to lose consciousness. When Marshall awakened, he found himself in utter darkness, his body trembling with fear. The sound of dirt falling on the coffin lid reached his ears, prompting him to scream and plead for anyone to hear his cries. But the onslaught of soil continued relentlessly, accompanied by the mechanical rumbling of an engine hard at work. As the final traces of hope dwindled, Marshall realized with dread that the earth was sealing his fate. Buried alive, the muffled sound of the machine's grinding gears, he was condemned to an eternity in the abyss.